It was a Tuesday night, one of those unremarkable weeknights that usually blend into the monotonous rhythm of corporate life. The office had gradually emptied as the evening progressed, with the usual parade of goodbyes and see you tomorrows echoing through the open floor plan. I remember glancing at the clock, 8:47 p.m., and realizing with a start that the ambient noise had faded to almost nothing. Just the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ping from my computer remained. That, and the soft tapping of keys from across the room where David sat, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his monitor. David and I weren't friends, not exactly. We were colleagues who shared occasional small talk by the coffee machine and collaborated on projects when necessary. He was the kind of person who commanded attention without trying, tall with dark hair that always fell perfectly into place, and a confidence that made even the most mundane statements sound profound. I'd noticed him, of course. It was impossible not to. But I'd filed those observations away as meaningless workplace distractions. That night, though, something felt different. Perhaps it was the unusual quietness of the office, or the way shadows stretched across the empty desks, creating an intimate bubble around the two remaining souls. I tried to focus on the quarterly report that had kept me late, but my eyes kept drifting toward his silhouette. The deadline looming over me suddenly seemed less important than the realization that we were completely alone. Let me explain what made this particular night different from the countless other late evenings I'd spent at the office. Earlier that day, our team had been scrambling to prepare for a major client presentation. The energy had been electric, people rushing between conference rooms, the printer working overtime, and our manager pacing nervously while reviewing slides. David had been particularly brilliant during the rehearsal, saving the presentation when our lead speaker froze. He'd stepped in with such natural grace that it seemed planned, explaining complex data with clarity and charm that had everyone, including me, hanging on his every word. I'd caught his eye briefly afterward, offering a small smile of appreciation, and he'd returned it with a wink that sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. That tiny interaction lingered in my mind as the office gradually emptied, leaving just the two of us behind. Still crunching those numbers? His voice startled me out of my thoughts. David had rolled his chair slightly in my direction, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that spoke of hours spent at the gym. Yeah, I replied, trying to sound casual despite the sudden dryness in my mouth. This report won't finish itself, unfortunately. He laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the empty space between us. The curse of being thorough. Everyone else submits the bare minimum and calls it a day. Is that what you're still doing here? Being thorough? I surprised myself with the teasing tone in my voice. Partly, he admitted, standing up and stretching in a way that made it impossible not to notice the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders. But I also enjoy the quiet. Sometimes I think better when everyone else has gone home. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. There was something peaceful about the office after hours, without the constant interruptions and the pressure to appear busy. It was a different world, one where the professional masks could slip just a little. David walked over to the small kitchen area, returning with 2 mugs of freshly brewed coffee. He placed one on my desk, careful not to disturb my scattered papers. "Thought you might need this," he said, leaning against the edge of my desk. The casual intimacy of the gesture wasn't lost on me. "Thanks," I murmured, taking a sip and trying not to think about how this was the first time we'd ever shared coffee outside of a team meeting. The bitter warmth spread through me, settling some of my nerves. "You don't have to stay on my account, though. I'm sure you have better things to do on a Tuesday night." He shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe I don't. Maybe this is exactly where I want to be." The implication hung in the air between us, neither acknowledged nor dismissed. I focused intently on my computer screen, though the numbers had ceased to make any sense. I could feel his presence, solid and warm beside me, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to remember why maintaining professional distance had ever seemed important. The office felt different in the dim evening light. Most of the overhead fluorescents had switched off automatically, leaving just the emergency lights and our desk lamps creating pools of gold in the darkness. The cityscape beyond the windows had transformed into a glittering tapestry of lights, reminding me of how small we were in this vast urban landscape. Yet somehow, in this moment, it felt like we were the only 2 people who mattered. How long have we been working together now? David asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. I thought for a moment. Almost 2 years, I think. You started a few months after I did. 2 years, he repeated, shaking his head slightly. And yet I feel like I barely know you. His words caught me off guard. We'd collaborated on projects, sat through countless meetings together, even attended the same company events. But he was right. We knew the professional versions of each other, the carefully constructed personas we presented to the workplace. The real person beneath remained largely a mystery. What do you want to know? I asked, finally turning to face him fully. The question felt dangerous, like opening a door that couldn't be closed again. David's eyes met mine, and I noticed for the first time that they weren't simply brown as I'd always thought, but flecked with gold that caught the light from my desk lamp. Everything, he said simply. The things that matter. And so we began to talk. Really talk, for what felt like the first time. He told me about growing up in a small coastal town, how he'd been the first in his family to attend college, and how he sometimes felt like an imposter in the corporate world despite his success. I shared stories about my chaotic family, my passion for photography that had been relegated to a weekend hobby, and my secret dream of one day opening a small bookstore cafe. As we spoke, we gradually moved from my desk to the comfortable seating area near the windows. The city spread out below us, a constellation of lights against the darkness. Our conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and moments of surprising vulnerability. I found myself sharing thoughts I'd never voiced aloud, and he listened with an intensity that made me feel truly seen. You know what's strange? He said after I'd finished telling him about a disastrous family vacation from my childhood. I've sat 10 feet away from you for 2 years, and I had no idea you were this funny. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee we'd been drinking. Maybe you never gave me the chance to be funny. A mistake I won't make again, he promised, his voice dropping slightly. The air between us seemed to change, charged with something unspoken but increasingly difficult to ignore. Time lost all meaning as we continued to talk. I glanced at my watch at one point and was shocked to discover it was nearly midnight. My report remained unfinished, but somehow it didn't seem to matter anymore. This connection we were forging felt more important than any deadline. We should probably think about heading home, I said reluctantly, though I made no move to gather my things. David nodded, but he too remained seated. Probably, he agreed. Then, after a pause, or we could stay a little longer. The invitation in his words was unmistakable. My heart began to race, and I found myself at a crossroads I hadn't anticipated when I decided to work late that evening. There was the sensible path: thank him for the company, pack up my things, and maintain the professional boundary that had defined our relationship for 2 years. Then there was the other path, the one that acknowledged the electricity between us and the rare connection we'd discovered in the quiet of the empty office. A little longer, I echoed softly, making my choice. He smiled, and in that moment, I saw something shift in his expression, a guardedness falling away to reveal genuine pleasure at my decision. We continued talking, but there was a new awareness between us, a heightened sensitivity to every gesture and word. When David stood up eventually, I thought he was finally preparing to leave. Instead, he walked to the main light switch by the door. These fluorescents give me a headache, he explained, and with a casual flick of his wrist, plunged the office into near darkness. Only the city lights through the windows and the small lamp in the corner now illuminated the space, casting long shadows and creating an atmosphere that felt decidedly un-office-like. When he returned to sit beside me, he was closer than before, our shoulders nearly touching. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice quiet in the darkness. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The dimness created a sense of intimacy that would have been impossible under the harsh office lights. It felt like we'd stepped out of our regular lives into a parallel universe where different rules applied. "I've wanted to talk to you like this for a long time," David admitted, his gaze fixed on the city below. "Really talk, I mean. Not about quarterly projections or client feedback." "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious. He'd always seemed so confident, so at ease in any situation. It was hard to imagine him hesitating to do anything he wanted. He turned to look at me, his face partially in shadow. "I wasn't sure if you'd be interested. You always seemed so focused. Professional. I didn't want to cross a line." I laughed softly. "And this isn't crossing a line?" He gestured to the darkened office. Our proximity, the late hour, definitely crosses several lines in the employee handbook. But it felt worth the risk tonight. His honesty was disarming. In the corporate world where everyone wore masks and played games, this straightforward admission felt revolutionary. My usual defenses, the careful boundaries I maintained between my professional and personal life, were crumbling in the face of his sincerity. "Tell me something you've never told anyone at work," he challenged gently. I thought for a moment, then decided to match his honesty with my own. "I almost quit last year," I confessed. "After the Mercer project, I was so burned out and disillusioned that I had my resignation letter written. I just never submitted it." "What stopped you?" he asked, genuinely interested. "Fear mostly," I admitted. Fear of change, of the unknown, and maybe a small hope that things would get better. And did they get better? I looked at him, at this unexpected connection we'd formed in the darkness, and smiled. Some things did. The conversation continued to deepen as the night progressed. We shared disappointments and triumphs, fears and hopes. Each revelation brought us closer, creating an intimacy that transcended the physical space between us. When David reached out to brush a strand of hair from my face, it felt like the most natural progression. His hand lingered, warm against my cheek. "I've been wanting to do that all night," he murmured. My heart was pounding so loudly I was certain he could hear it. The professional part of my brain was screaming caution, reminding me of all the reasons this was complicated and potentially disastrous. But another part, the part that had been awakened by our conversation and the unusual intimacy of the darkened office, was urging me forward. "What else have you been wanting to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question hung between us for a heartbeat. Then David leaned forward, closing the distance between us. His lips met mine in a kiss that was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. When I responded, leaning into him and bringing my hand to rest against his chest, the kiss deepened into something more certain. Time seemed to stop in that moment. The office around us, the city beyond the windows, our professional identities, all of it faded into insignificance compared to the connection we were sharing. His hand moved to the small of my back, drawing me closer, and I allowed myself to be guided, my usual resistance melting away in the warmth of his embrace. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "I hope that wasn't." I silenced his concern with another brief kiss. "It wasn't," I assured him. We sat together in the darkness, the boundary between colleagues irreversibly altered. There would be complications to navigate, questions to answer, decisions to make. But in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. "So what happens tomorrow?" I finally asked, voicing the question that had begun to form at the edges of my mind. David took my hand, his thumb tracing patterns against my palm. "Tomorrow we go back to being marketing analysts who have presentations to give and reports to file," he said pragmatically. "But maybe we also have lunch together. And dinner, if you'd like." "And the day after that?" I pressed, needing some assurance that this wasn't just a momentary connection born of late hours and darkened offices. He smiled, and even in the dim light, I could see the warmth in his eyes. "The day after that, we figure it out together. One step at a time." It was a reasonable answer, though part of me wanted more certainty. But I was beginning to understand that certainty wasn't what this night had been about. It had been about taking chances, about seeing the person behind the professional facade, about finding connection in unexpected places. We stayed a while longer, talking and sharing occasional kisses, before finally acknowledging that the real world awaited us in the morning. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, David turned to me one last time. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm glad we were the last ones here tonight." "Me too," I replied, meaning it more than I could express. He reached for the light switch again, but this time to turn on the lights so we could safely make our way out. The sudden brightness made me blink, momentarily disorienting me. The office looked exactly as it always did, desks arranged in neat rows, motivational posters on the walls, the coffee machine waiting to be awakened in the morning. But something fundamental had changed. As we walked to the elevator together, I realized that the resistance I'd felt, to connection, to vulnerability, to stepping outside the carefully constructed boundaries of my professional life, had been turned off along with those lights. Whatever happened next, I had allowed myself to be seen, truly seen, by someone who had been in my orbit for years without ever really entering it. The next morning arrived with the usual rush of emails and meetings, but underneath the familiar routine ran a current of awareness whenever David was nearby. We exchanged glances across the conference room, our shared secret adding a layer of excitement to the mundane workday. True to his word, he stopped by my desk at lunchtime, casually asking if I wanted to join him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Over sandwiches in the park across from our building, we talked about how to navigate our evolving relationship in the professional setting. There were practical considerations, company policies about disclosure, the potential impact on team dynamics, the risk of office gossip. But beneath these logistical concerns lay a deeper question. Was this connection strong enough to be worth the complications? As days turned into weeks, we found our rhythm. Professional during office hours, with only the occasional private smile or brush of hands to betray the change between us. After work, we explored our connection further, discovering shared interests in obscure films and spicy food, debating books and politics, learning the contours of each other's lives beyond the confines of our job titles. It wasn't always smooth. There were moments of doubt, of wondering whether we'd made a mistake in crossing that line. The first time we disagreed about a project strategy in a team meeting, the personal tension bled into our professional interaction in ways that felt uncomfortable. We had to learn to separate our roles, to respect each other's expertise even when we disagreed. But there were also moments of profound connection that made every complication worthwhile. The night David came to my apartment during a thunderstorm, soaking wet because he'd forgotten his umbrella, just to tell me he'd fallen in love with me. The weekend we drove to the coast and spent hours walking along the beach, planning dreams that had nothing to do with quarterly targets or career advancement. 6 months after that night in the darkened office, we decided to formally disclose our relationship to HR. It was a nerve-wracking conversation, but ultimately uneventful. Company policy required only that we recuse ourselves from decisions directly affecting each other's performance reviews or compensation. Our colleagues' reactions ranged from surprise to knowing smiles that suggested our secret hadn't been as well kept as we'd imagined. Looking back now, I'm struck by how a single moment, the simple act of turning off the lights in an empty office, became the catalyst for such profound change in my life. Had either of us left earlier that night, had we maintained the professional distance that had defined our interaction for 2 years, our paths might have continued in parallel without ever truly intersecting. Instead, we found the courage to step out of our prescribed roles and see each other as complete human beings, with desires and fears and dreams that extended far beyond the corporate identity. In doing so, we discovered that sometimes the most meaningful connections form when we allow our carefully constructed defenses to fall away. I still work at the same company, though I've moved to a different department now. David and I made that decision together, wanting to minimize any potential conflicts while still pursuing our individual career goals. We have a small apartment with a view of the city, not quite as spectacular as from the office windows where we first kissed, but it's ours. Sometimes, when we're both working late at home, I'll look up to find him watching me with the same intensity he showed that night. And I'm reminded that the greatest risk I ever took wasn't jumping to a new position or taking on a challenging project. It was allowing myself to be vulnerable with someone who saw beyond my professional facade. For anyone who's ever felt the spark of connection in an unexpected place, who's wondered whether to follow the safe path or risk stepping into the unknown. Sometimes, when the lights go off and the world narrows to just 2 people finding each other in the darkness, the most courageous thing you can do is let your resistance fade away. What you might find on the other side could be worth every moment of uncertainty. In the end, it wasn't just about romance, though that was certainly part of it. It was about having the courage to be authentic in a world that often rewards conformity and caution. It was about recognizing that behind every professional title and carefully crafted email signature is a person with depths worth exploring. And it was about understanding that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen when we least expect them. Even on an ordinary Tuesday night, when you find yourself the last 2 people in an office, with only the city lights witnessing the moment everything changes. Total _char_count, 18,721.